Protect your DNA. BioPQQ can promote formation of new mitochondria. Infowarsstore.com.
The FBI is now saying that the end of the Islamic State will not end radical terror overseas. These are the words of FBI Director James Comey. He says not all Islamic State killers are going to die on the battlefield. He compared it to the situation in Afghanistan in the 1980s when the CIA recruited and armed mujahideen to defeat the Soviet Union. Remnants of the CIA project subsequently evolved into Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. This is an order of magnitude greater than anything we've seen before, Comey said. A lot of terrorists fled out of Afghanistan. This is 10 times that or more. Basically saying that when you take them out in one area, they're going to go to another area. And I do agree with this, but you have to understand whether it's Comey now or his, I guess, good buddy, Mrs. Clinton, who said many years ago, the people that we're fighting against today are the same people we armed, referring to the mujahideen. This is a cycle that continues to grow. We talk about this all the time, or at least I talk about it all the time, whether it's people in the Middle East or giving guns to the Mexican drug cartels. They have this mentality that they want to give guns to people to take out an enemy and then hope that that person is going to do what they want them to do. A good example of this, let's just bring it here to domestic terms. Let's say you have the Crips and the Bloods in your town, right? So the police chief says, okay, the Bloods have too much territory. They're tearing up a bunch of stuff. I'm gonna give guns to the Crips so the Crips can go fight the Bloods. Lo and behold, the Crips beat the Bloods. Do you think the Crips are going to go to their local gun buyback and turn in all their firearms? No, you think they're gonna give up this territory they've just won from their enemies? No, so this is the type of mentality that continues to be repeated. It's nothing new. It's more than likely going to continue well into our next administration. And this is just something you need to be aware of. And this is when I hear, about military interventions, I always cringe a little bit. I'm like, what exactly is the end game here? Because you see groups like the Syrian rebels we've been talking about for the past couple of weeks. They're overseas cutting off a little boy's head. They saw his head off with a knife, and then they say, oh, it was an accident. It was a mistake. It was something, a momentary indiscretion or something to that like. Just these State Department apologists making up these excuses. And this is fresh off the FBI, of course, doctoring the transcripts of the Orlando shooter. And that's the thing with the FBI. They have a ability to really do something good and really do something positive. There are plenty of good people in the FBI who keep the bad guys at bay, but then you have the people who, not just in the FBI, but in other alphabet agencies as well, that coddle people into doing these crimes and to where they're actually supporting them in doing that. But that's enough of that. Let's talk about some different news, talk about some domestic news, talking about firearms here. And it's often a talking point when you hear these anti-gun groups or these reasonable gun control measure groups. They're saying that the simple fact that firearm ownership exists here in the United States is anti-woman. You don't support women's rights if you support the Second Amendment, which is completely bizarre because they will tell you the stories about some guy who used a gun to force a young lady into a very unfortunate situation, but they don't tell you the stories about the young ladies who pull out a gun and blow the bad guy's head off. And this is a rape survivor. She was talking to Fox News, and she was saying when she was attacked, she did wish that she had that firearm.
The thought of owning a handgun terrified me until one morning, a stranger broke into my apartment and raped me. He had evil in his eyes, and I was helpless. My fear of firearms disappeared when I got my second chance at life.
Your right to own a gun for self-defense is at risk in this election. Hillary Clinton would take away your rights.
Self-defense is your right. Don't let it be taken away.
The NRA Political Victory Fund is responsible for the content of this advertising.
Now, in other news, the DNC is winding up, and our crew is out there along with James O'Keefe, of course, of Project Veritas. He's brought you many great reports over the years, talking about things like Acorn, many other things as well. And now he had this thought while he was at the DNC. There's a very large and very vocal group of Bernie supporters, out there supporting the ideals of Bernie Sanders. I won't say so much the man. They see that now the man is a fraud, but the ideals of Bernie Sanders. And O'Keefe said, well, what's going to happen if I dress up like a Hillary Clinton supporter and go out amongst the people? And this is what happened. It's rather shocking.
At this point, what difference does it make? I don't care.
Brothers and sisters go to jail. She gets a paycheck. How is that qualified?
I'm sorry.
How is that qualified?
I don't appreciate being yelled at. I'm just trying to support our first female president, to be honest with you.
I can't talk normal with you.
Yelling.
It's all I can do.
There's people handing out cards. We want you to go to our Facebook page. We're getting our website too. We're going to help you.
If Hillary is still here for your
Hey, I don't care.
And this is just one of many examples of these tolerant leftists, these socialists, and how they act. Whether it's they're tackling James O'Keefe or it's the rallies we go out to, they're screaming in people's faces, calling them racial epithets, or saying that you're not a real Hispanic or you're not a real black if you vote for candidate X, or they're throwing eggs in young ladies' faces. They're yelling at people walking around with their babies. They're throwing fireballs and barricades at the cops and the cop horses. They're throwing rocks at other demonstrators. And it continues to happen, but everything's Donald Trump's fault. These guys can go out here and do all these horrendous deals, or even in that example with O'Keefe, they'll say that it's Hillary's fault that happened. No, it's not Hillary's fault. It's not Bernie's fault. It's not Trump's fault. It's the individuals who choose to participate in those actions. And there's a longer clip of that James O'Keefe exchange, and you can see the guy, with his very sorry excuse as to why he thought that was okay to physically attack James O'Keefe for the heinous crime of holding a sign in the United States of America. But these are the mentalities of these leftists. I keep trying to tell you about this. We've demonstrated this many times, whether it's Planned Parenthood or the political rallies or the gun rallies or the anti-gun rallies. These are the type of people who show up there to do actual damage, and that's case in point right there. Now with this, as we're talking about these large crowds that can get rather unruly, we're seeing that Virginia police are now training for civil unrest and racial riots. Now, it's very sad that we're to this point where the police are starting to do these things more frequently. Of course, we do know that these things do happen, and I'm not trying to downplay that at all, but it's a very fine line between using your equipment responsibly and not using it responsibly. A case in point, when we went to Ferguson before, things got super crazy, the cops were out there on the MRAPs aiming guns at people in the crowd. I think that incited a few people. They were very upset. And why wouldn't you? You cannot aim a gun at a person. They weren't just holding a gun. They were actually aiming it at people in the crowd, looking through the scope and all that. So that type of stuff is definitely uncalled for, but there are situations when you do need to have preparations. So it's a very fine line. And let's take a look at this video of this training.
This might seem like chaos, but this took weeks of preparation and one shaped by a riot right here in the Valley. You might remember Spring Fest of 2010.
America is paying attention to the recent rising political and racial tensions causing scenes like this. And that's why newer officers with the Harrisonburg Police Department and James Madison University are out here today learning how to deal with civil unrest.
This is the beginning of the long march against tyranny. We are running the biggest special we've ever run that we started running Wednesday. Most of the specials will continue through the weekend. A lot of things are about to sell out. The purchases, whether it's the supplements or whether it's a Hillary for Prison shirt or whether it is a film or a book on any subject of geopolitical import you can imagine, your purchase of these high-quality products is what makes this operation possible. We have the amazing nootropic as building blocks that your brain needs. 20% off all Pro Pure water filters. 20% off all Alexa Pure air filters. We already have the lowest price on all this. 30% off all Survival Shield X2. And I want to salute and thank everyone who has been taking advantage of this sale, who have been wearing the Hillary for Prison shirts. You're making the news around the country. You're showing the power of grassroots activism, even if they flip on the internet kill switch of how we're going to resist at the grassroots level with information warfare. No one's ever stood up to them. All we're doing is standing up. You stood up with us. Your funding is essential. Thank you.